It was supposed to be a quiet night at home, until a desperate act of sabotage was caught on camera. Karen, a troubled neighbor, unplugged Michael's outdoor heater in a fit of rage. But her selfish crime didn't go unnoticed. Security footage went viral, and now the entire neighborhood wants justice. The fallout is just beginning. Michael rubbed his eyes and frowned at the chilly evening air. Strange, his backyard heater was turned off, and the cozy glow of the flames had been replaced by an eerie darkness. He'd been looking forward to relaxing outside with the hot toddy, but now the mood was ruined. "That's weird," he murmured, striding over to the heater and checking the power switch. It was in the on position, but no matter how many times he flipped it, the unit remained dark and silent. His frown deepened as he scanned the area. Nothing seemed out of place, except for his neighbor Karen, who was hurriedly making her way back to her own house, shoulders hunched against the cold. Michael's eyes narrowed. He and Karen had never seen eye to eye, and he distinctly remembered an argument they'd had last week about the noise from his backyard gatherings. Had she really sabotaged his heater? Marching over to the fence, he called out, "Hey, Karen, did you do something to my heater?" Karen froze, then slowly turned around. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb with me," Michael snapped. "I saw you sneaking away from over here. Did you unplug it?" Karen's gaze darted away, and Michael knew he'd hit the mark. "I was just checking on it," she mumbled. "Checking on it? By unplugging it?" Michael's voice rose in frustration. "That's my property, Karen. You can't just." "I was cold, okay." Karen interrupted, her own volume escalating. "I wanted to use your heater, and you weren't out here, so you thought you'd just help yourself." Michael cut her off, incredulous. "That's not how this works. You can't." "I'm sorry, all right?" Karen shot back, her face flushing with shame and anger. "I didn't mean to." But Michael was no longer listening. Whirling around, he stalked back to the heater and snatched up his phone, fingers flying over the screen. "What are you doing?" Karen demanded, her voice laced with panic. "What does it look like?" Michael retorted. "I'm calling the police." Karen's eyes went wide. "The police? But—" "You trespassed on my property and tampered with my belongings," Michael said coldly. "That's a crime, Karen. And I've got the security footage to prove it." Karen's face drained of color. "No, please." But Michael was already pressing the call button, his gaze unwavering. The consequences of Karen's actions were about to unfold, and this time there would be no escaping them. The officer's arrival was swift and efficient. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue lights of a patrol car illuminated the quiet neighborhood, and Michael watched grimly as Karen's shoulders slumped in resignation. "Sir, what seems to be the problem here?" the officer asked, stepping out of the car and adjusting his uniform. Michael quickly explained the situation, emphasizing Karen's unauthorized entry onto his property and her admitted tampering with his backyard heater. The officer's expression grew increasingly stern as he listened, and when Michael mentioned the security footage, the man's brow furrowed. "I see." The officer turned to Karen, who was standing with her head bowed. "Ma'am, is this true? Did you unplug Mr. Johnson's heater without his permission?" Karen hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yes, officer. I was cold, and I just wanted to use it for a little while. I didn't think it would be a big deal." The officer's frown deepened. "I'm afraid that's not how it works. Tampering with someone else's property, even if it's just for a short time, is against the law. You could be charged with trespassing and criminal mischief." Karen's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. "Charged? But I didn't mean any harm. I understand you may not have intended to cause any damage," the officer interrupted, "but the fact remains that you did violate Mr. Johnson's rights as a homeowner. Now, do you have any prior criminal history that I should be aware of?" Karen shook her head mutely, her face pale with dread. The officer nodded, his expression grim. Very well. In that case, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me down to the station. We'll need to get your statement and determine the appropriate course of action. Karen's eyes filled with tears. Please, officer, is there any way we can resolve this without involving the police? I don't want a criminal record. But the officer was already gesturing for her to step towards the patrol car. I'm afraid that's not up to me, ma'am. The decision to pursue charges will be made by the district attorney's office. Now, please come with me. The sooner we get this sorted out, the better. As Karen was ushered into the backseat, her gaze locked with Michael's, silently pleading for mercy. But Michael couldn't bring himself to feel sorry for her. She had brought this on herself, and now she would have to face the consequences. The officer climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, and Michael watched as the patrol car pulled away, Karen's muffled sobs fading into the distance. Part of him felt a twinge of guilt, but another part, the part that still stung from their heated argument the week prior, couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Just wait until the neighbors hear about this, he thought grimly. Karen's reputation was about to take a serious hit. As the patrol car carrying Karen disappeared down the street, Michael felt a strange mix of emotions, part satisfaction, part unease. He knew he had done the right thing by calling the police, but a small part of him couldn't help but wonder if he had gone too far. Shaking off the lingering doubts, he hurried back to the house and fired up his laptop. If Karen was going to face serious consequences for her actions, he might as well make sure the entire neighborhood knew about it. Within minutes, he had uploaded the security footage to a popular neighborhood forum, adding a brief caption. My neighbor Karen unplugged my outdoor heater tonight. I called the cops and she was arrested. Unbelievable. As soon as he hit post, the comments began flooding in. Whoa, what a jerk. I can't believe she had the nerve to do that. Serves her right. Karen's always been a troublemaker. Glad you got it on camera. She deserves whatever's coming to her. Michael couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as he read the reactions. It seemed the community was solidly on his side. Karen's reputation was about to take a serious hit. But just as he was about to close the laptop, a new comment popped up that made his stomach twist with unease. Dude, this is messed up. You really had to call the cops on your neighbor? That's harsh. Michael frowned, scrolling down to see more messages expressing similar sentiments. I mean, yeah, she shouldn't have unplugged your heater, but did you really have to get the police involved? Seems like a bit of an overreaction, don't you think? Karen's kind of a jerk, but jail time. Suddenly, Michael didn't feel quite so vindicated. Had he really gone too far by calling the authorities? Karen's actions had certainly been wrong, but was landing her in legal trouble the appropriate response? He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. This was turning into a much bigger mess than he had anticipated. Now he couldn't help but wonder if he had acted too hastily, and whether the consequences he had set in motion would ultimately do more harm than good. As Karen sat in the back seat of the patrol car, her mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, shame, and a creeping sense of dread all mingled together, making her stomach churn. She couldn't believe this was happening. A simple act of desperation had spiraled out of control, and now she was facing the very real possibility of criminal charges. The thought of having a permanent mark on her record filled her with a paralyzing sense of panic. Please, officer, she pleaded, her voice trembling. Is there any way we can handle this without getting the law involved? I'll pay for the heater or do community service, or... I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's not my decision to make, the officer replied, his tone apologetic but firm. The district attorney's office will determine the appropriate course of action based on the evidence and the nature of the offense. Karen felt her heart sink. There was no avoiding this now. Her reckless actions had set a series of events in motion that she couldn't control. As the patrol car pulled into the station, Karen's dread only grew. The bright lights and bustling activity only served to heighten her sense of vulnerability. She was led inside, past the rows of holding cells, and past the imposing desks of the officers on duty. "Have a seat here, please," the officer instructed, gesturing to a small, uncomfortable-looking chair. "I'll need to take your statement and fingerprints." Karen nodded mutely, sinking into the chair with a heavy sigh. As the officer began the process, she couldn't help but reflect on the sheer stupidity of her actions. All she had wanted was a bit of warmth on a chilly evening, but now she was facing the very real possibility of a criminal record, something that could haunt her for years to come. And then there was the matter of Michael. She cringed inwardly, remembering the look of cold fury on his face as he had dialed the police. He had clearly been fed up with her antics, and she couldn't blame them. She had overstepped a clear boundary, and now she was facing the consequences. As the officer continued his questioning, Karen felt a growing sense of resignation. There was no easy way out of this mess. All she could do now was try to cooperate and hope for the best, that the district attorney would show her some leniency, and that the damage to her reputation wouldn't be too severe. One thing was certain: her life was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The following day, Michael found himself the reluctant center of attention in his close-knit neighborhood. Word of Karen's arrest had spread like wildfire, and his neighbors were eager to discuss the incident in detail. "I can't believe she actually unplugged your heater. That's just so brazen," exclaimed his next-door neighbor, Cindy, shaking her head in disbelief. "I mean, I know she and I have had our differences, but I never thought she'd stoop to something like that." Michael nodded, feeling a twinge of guilt. "Yeah, I was pretty shocked too. I didn't really mean for it to escalate to the point of an arrest, but she just left me no choice." Cindy patted his arm sympathetically. "Don't feel bad, Michael. You did the right thing. Karen's been causing trouble around here for years, and it's high time she faced some real consequences for her actions." "I guess so," Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I can't help but wonder if I went too far. I mean, the cops got involved, and now she's facing potential criminal charges. That's a pretty heavy price to pay for just unplugging a heater, you know." Cindy frowned. "Are you kidding? She's lucky that's all she's facing. If it were me, I would have called the cops the moment she set foot on my property. This is your home, Michael. You have a right to feel safe and secure here, without some nutcase neighbor messing with your stuff." Michael nodded reluctantly, but the uneasy feeling in the pit of his stomach persisted. He couldn't shake the memory of Karen's desperate, pleading gaze as the officer had ushered her into the patrol car. She had clearly been terrified, and a part of him couldn't help but empathize with her predicament. "I don't know, Cindy. I mean, I get that she was in the wrong, but maybe there could have been a way to resolve this without getting the law involved." Cindy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you seriously defending her right now?" "Michael, she broke the law. She deserves whatever's coming to her." Michael held up a hand, trying to placate his neighbor. "I'm not defending her actions, I swear. I don't know. I guess I'm feeling a little conflicted about the whole thing, that's all." Cindy shook her head, her expression a mix of exasperation and concern. "Well, I hope you can work through those feelings, Michael. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you did the neighborhood a favor by holding Karen accountable. God knows someone needed to put a stop to her shenanigans." As Cindy turned and headed back to her own house, Michael was left with a growing sense of unease. Had he really done the right thing by calling the cops on Karen? Or had he let his own personal grievances cloud his judgment, leading to a punishment that was harsher than the crime? He sighed heavily, wishing he had a clearer answer. All he knew was that the fallout from this incident was far from over. As the days passed, the initial shock of Karen's arrest began to wear off, and the neighborhood's attention gradually shifted elsewhere. But for Karen, the aftermath was far from over. She had been released on bail the same night, but the looming specter of criminal charges weighed heavily on her mind. She knew that the district attorney's office would be reviewing her case, and the possibility of a conviction filled her with dread. Worse still, the viral nature of the security footage had thrust her into the unwelcome spotlight. Neighbors who had previously been indifferent to her now eyed her with suspicion, and some even went out of their way to avoid her. Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation and shame as she went about her daily routine. The once friendly greetings and casual chit-chat had been replaced by awkward silences and furtive glances. It was as if the entire neighborhood had turned against her. And then there was the matter of Michael. Karen cringed every time she caught sight of him, the memory of his cold, accusing stare burning in her mind. She had tried to approach him a few times, hoping to apologize and perhaps find a way to make amends, but he had rebuffed her efforts with icy indifference. "Please, Michael, I'm really sorry about what happened," she had pleaded, her voice quivering. "I know I made a mistake, but is there any way we can resolve this without the police getting involved?" But Michael had simply shaken his head, his expression impassive. "It's too late for that, Karen. You made your choice, and now you have to face the consequences." His words had stung, and Karen had retreated, feeling utterly defeated. She knew that she had only herself to blame for this predicament, but the weight of it all was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. As the days turned into weeks, Karen found herself sinking into a spiral of despair. She had always prided herself on being a good neighbor and a responsible member of the community, but now all of that seemed to have been undone by a single impulsive act. The thought of potentially facing criminal charges only added to her anguish. She couldn't bear the idea of having a permanent blemish on her record, something that could haunt her for years to come. It was a price she wasn't sure she was willing to pay. With each passing day, Karen found herself growing more and more isolated, her once vibrant social life reduced to a mere shadow of its former self. The neighborhood that had once felt like a warm, welcoming community now seemed cold and unwelcoming, a constant reminder of the consequences of her actions. As she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, Karen couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to undo the damage she had caused. But deep down, she knew that the only path forward was to face the music, no matter how unpleasant the outcome might be. The day of Karen's court appearance dawned gray and somber, a fitting reflection of the mood that hung over the neighborhood. As she made the familiar journey to the courthouse, Karen's stomach twisted with a mixture of dread and resignation. She had spent countless sleepless nights agonizing over the potential consequences of her actions, and now the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. With each step, she felt the weight of her mistake bearing down on her, a constant reminder of the foolishness that had led her to this point. When Karen finally entered the courtroom, the silence was deafening. All eyes turned towards her as she took her seat, her hands trembling slightly. She scanned the room, hoping to catch a glimpse of Michael, but he was nowhere to be seen. As the proceedings began, Karen listened with a heavy heart as the prosecutor laid out the charges against her, trespassing and criminal mischief. The words hung in the air, accusatory and unforgiving, and Karen felt the lump rise in her throat. The judge, a stern-faced man with steely eyes, fixed Karen with a cold stare. "Ms. Wilkins, how do you plead?" Karen took a deep, shaky breath. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The response elicited a murmur from the audience, and Karen cringed inwardly. She knew it was a long shot, but she had to at least try to avoid a conviction. The judge nodded, his expression unreadable. "Very well. Let's proceed with the presentation of evidence." As the security footage was played for the court, Karen's heart sank. The damning images left no room for doubt. There she was, clearly unplugging Michael's heater and then hurrying away. The irrefutable proof of her guilt weighed heavily on her, and she felt a sense of resignation settle over her. When the prosecutor finished his opening statements, the judge turned to Karen's defense attorney. "Does the defense have any witnesses or evidence to present?" Karen's lawyer stood, his expression grim. "Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call Ms. Wilkins to the stand." Karen took a deep breath and made her way to the witness box, her legs feeling like lead. As she was sworn in, she glanced around the courtroom, her gaze finally landing on Michael, who was seated quietly in the back. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Karen thought she saw a flicker of empathy in his expression. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the same unyielding determination that had been there since the night of the incident. Karen swallowed hard, then began to speak, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I trespassed on Mr. Johnson's property and tampered with his belongings, and I take full responsibility for that. But I never intended to cause any real harm. I was cold, and I wanted to use his heater for a little while. I didn't think it would be a big deal." She paused, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I understand that my actions were illegal, and I'm prepared to face the consequences. But I'm begging you, please don't ruin my life over this. I've never been in trouble with the law before, and a criminal record would be devastating for me and my family." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked up at the judge, her expression pleading. "I'm truly sorry for what I've done, and I promised it will never happen again. I hope you can show me some leniency." As Karen's testimony came to an end, the courtroom fell silent. The judge studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a heavy sigh, he spoke. "Ms. Wilkins, I've carefully considered the evidence presented here today, as well as the arguments made by both the prosecution and the defense. It's clear that your actions were unlawful and caused significant distress to your neighbor, Mr. Johnson." He paused, his gaze momentarily flickering towards Michael. "However, I'm also mindful of the fact that this appears to be an isolated incident, and that you have no prior criminal history. Therefore, I'm inclined to show you some leniency." Karen felt a glimmer of hope stirring within her, and she leaned forward, hanging on the judge's every word. "I'm going to withhold a formal conviction in this case," the judge continued. "Instead, you will be placed on probation for a period of 1 year, during which time you must perform 100 hours of community service and refrain from any further unlawful behavior. If you comply with these terms, the charges against you will be dismissed." Karen exhaled a shaky breath, her eyes wide with relief. "Thank you, Your Honor. I promised I won't let you down." As the judge adjourned the proceedings, Karen felt a weight lift from her shoulders. While the ordeal was not yet over, she had been granted a second chance, one that she was determined not to squander. Glancing back towards the rear of the courtroom, she caught Michael's eye. This time, there was a hint of a smile on his face, and Karen felt a surge of gratitude. Perhaps, in time, they could even rebuild their fractured relationship. With renewed determination, Karen strode out of the courthouse, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. The road ahead might be long and difficult, but she was ready to face it head-on, determined to prove that she was more than just the sum of her mistakes. In the weeks that followed the court hearing, a palpable shift could be felt in the neighborhood. Karen's probation and community service sentence had been met with a mix of reactions. Some neighbors viewed it as a slap on the wrist, while others felt it was a fair and reasonable outcome. As for Michael, he found himself somewhat torn. On one hand, he was relieved that Karen had avoided a criminal conviction, as he knew the lasting impact that could have had on her life. But on the other, a part of him still grappled with the lingering resentment over the incident. It was during one of his backyard gatherings that Michael finally decided to make the first move towards reconciliation. As the evening wound down and his guests began to filter out, he noticed Karen walking by, her head bowed. Taking a deep breath, Michael stepped out from his yard and called out to her. "Hey, Karen, do you have a minute?" Karen paused, her expression apprehensive. "What is it, Michael?" "Look, I wanted to talk to you about what happened," Michael began, suddenly feeling a bit self-conscious. "I know things got pretty heated between us, and I maybe went a little overboard with the whole police thing. I just want you to know that I don't hold any grudges, and I'm not going to cause you any more trouble. Karen stared at him, her eyes widening with surprise. You're not? Michael shook his head. No, I'm not. I know you've been through a lot these past few weeks, and I can only imagine how difficult it's been for you. I just wanted to put this whole mess behind us, if that's all right with you. For a moment, Karen was speechless, her gaze searching Michael's face for any hint of deception. But all she saw was genuine sincerity. I don't know what to say, she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. I never expected you to be so understanding after everything I've done. Michael offered her a small smile. Well, we all make mistakes, Karen. The important thing is that we learn from them and try to do better going forward. Karen nodded, her own lips curving into a tentative smile. You're right, and I promise I'm going to do everything in my power to make this right, both with you and with the rest of the neighborhood. I believe you, Michael replied, extending his hand. So, what do you say we start over? Clean slate. Karen hesitated for only a moment before reaching out and grasping his hand firmly. Clean slate. And thank you, Michael, for everything. As they shook hands, a sense of closure and newfound understanding passed between them. The once bitter rivals had found a way to move past their differences, and in doing so, had forged a path towards a more harmonious future. In the days that followed, Karen threw herself wholeheartedly into her community's service, determined to make amends and rebuild the trust she had lost. And slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to welcome her back with open arms, recognizing her genuine efforts to make things right. As for the security footage that had once threatened to be her undoing, it eventually faded from the public's memory, replaced by newer, more sensational stories. And in the end, the only lasting impact was a newfound appreciation for the power of forgiveness and the resilience of the human spirit.